Hey, welcome to the Corey Miceli Show. This is Corey Miceli with my co-host, the sexy Viking, Matthias Bergstrom Anderson, out of the beautiful country of Denmark. The Corey Miceli Show is brought to you by Rap Fiend Radio and Squat Life, manufacturers of CNS Activator, the only CNS fuel designed for the power athlete. Okay, let's get on with the show. Matthias, you said you had a couple of, just in our off-show conversation, you said you had a few questions about some of my training competitive background. So let's get started with that.
Yeah, so we talked recently about how you used to train when you were doing your best at with powerlifting. And I just remember you said that sometimes on a Saturday, you would train for up to 5 to 7 hours and do like a shitload of singles. And I'm just curious, like how your whole training setup was and how that day looked, how it fit together.
Okay, cool. Well, let me start with a little bit of background. Two elements to the way I'm going to start this answer. One is I grew up in Aurora, Illinois, home to the legendary Ernie Franz. And if anyone's listened to previous episodes, they've heard me talk a little bit about, growing up in that culture of the Franz Sports Center. So Ernie Franz was a pioneer strength coach, man. He was a strength coach before there was even the buzzword strength coach. And Ernie was a big believer in training in the same format that you use for your competitive day. So in powerlifting, that would be maxing out the squat, the bench, and the deadlift all the same day. So the fundamental process on a Ernie Franz powerlifting training day on a Saturday was you would go heavy in squatting, bench pressing, and deadlifting virtually every Saturday. So that was kind of ingrained in my thinking pattern from a fairly young age, the high school athlete on. As a college football player, I ultimately became, as far as I know, the strongest football player in the nation my senior year, 1994, at Northern Illinois University. As a college athlete, I achieved a bench press well into the 500s. I could rep out 500 pounds, for a good, decent rep set, 3 to 5 reps. My power clean was like 424 pounds, I believe. And my squat max was 900, and I did reps. So I did have a tremendous background in strength training as a younger athlete. During my college football days, I remember having a conversation about Powerlifting USA magazine. And I remember I don't even remember who the powerlifter was, but he was a bit older and he'd hit some major numbers. So kind of just had a conversation with myself and said, when you turn 40, you can jump in and see how you do in the sport of powerlifting. Just kind of put it on the shelf until then. So anyway, getting to a more direct answer to your question, in the culture of training that we had at Barbell Central Gym, not sure if any of you listeners know about Barbell Central, but for a few years, it was kind of like a mecca of powerlifting, at least in the Midwest. And most, if not all, of the competitive lifters that were training under our roof grew up in that Franz culture. So Saturdays became like the main heavy training day. So how does one justify a 5 to 7 hour workout? Well, if you know anything about powerlifting, or if you've ever done a powerlifting meet, even a smaller meet lasts multiple hours. And we would kind of use Saturdays as like the main base of our training. So how did it take 5 to 7 hours? We would do oftentimes the main course for the day of training would just be heavy squatting. You'd have 10, 12 people on one squat rack and you'd roll through just like a meet, probably a little slower than a meet pace. So just, getting up to an 1,100 pound squat with reasonable jumps starting out from your warm-ups takes a while. Wrapping your knees, recovering between sets, and having adequate spotters and keeping a decent flow can easily take 2 hours plus, even going at a decent pace. So shout out to the Lily Bridge crew. If anyone is like knows about the strength training world or powerlifting, then you know who the Lily Bridges are. And they kind of took the lead as far as like the training pattern that most people followed. And if you even watched Eric Lillybridge train at his peak, basically the same principle. Heavy singles, kind of doing an alternating pattern of 1 week light, 1 week heavy, 1 week light, 1 week heavy. There's other ways of breaking that down, but bottom line, you're in the gym on a Saturday, you're in a highly competitive mindset, you're approaching your lifting the same or similar way that you would do on a meet day. So it was just a very lengthy process in nature. And oftentimes some of the supplemental movements or additional movements that we would incorporate would involve incredibly heavy weight. So the nature of like safely handling overload training takes time. It takes more recovery. Just loading the plates, unloading the plates, and setting the stage effectively and safely to perform those super heavy lifts, whether it's like a block lift on deadlift, a partial Anderson lift on a squat, a heavy negative on a squat, or just a max effort on a squat. The nature of it is quite time consuming. So take it from there. Just doing the process properly was quite time demanding just by the nature of it. So side note, in that time frame, I really think I became one of the best knee wrapping specialists in the world, no doubt, because I would on some Saturdays do no less than 30 high tension, high quality knee wraps. And I think that led to developing like some really potent grip strength. It was a phenomenal experience. Although at the time it felt like a bit of a burden. Looking back on it, I became excellent. I became an expert at wrapping knees, and it really helped build some hand and wrist strength that really became superior. It's kind of a side note, but just thought I'd mention it. So I'll shut up. I'm starting to ramble a little bit. I know you had some more questions on kind of the specifics of what we did. So if you could kind of narrow that scope down with a couple of questions, I'd appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, about taking 2 hours to like warm up, I mean, isn't there like an element of just over time getting in better shape and learning to cut back on rest time between sets? Like maybe, instead of 3 minutes between sets, maybe some of them you could just go 1 minute. Like, did you go through such a phase, or is that too unrealistic when you're going over 1,000 pounds?
Well, I can only talk about specifically me as it relates to that. For squatting, if I wasn't most of my warm-ups for preparing for a heavy squat day did not even involve lifting weights. It was just movement, blood flow, getting my body like generally warmed up without overdoing it. And I would get to a point where literally like my first set at my peak strength, my first set was typically with like 400 pounds. I wouldn't even really mess around with many of the, I would kind of skip 1, 2, and 3 plates just because I would take the time to really get my knees, hips, like general blood flow and general state of mind in gear. And for me as an athlete, that took a pretty significant amount of time just because I was like, I just wanted to be safe when I was attacking those really big weights. I just felt like personally for me, getting thoroughly warmed up without a barbell was like paramount to being successful with the barbell. So there's probably like a 45-minute period of doing that before I'd even take the first set.
Do you think maybe that in retrospect that having to take 45 minutes to get ready was maybe a sign that you were having some issues, like some weaknesses or some, I don't know, maybe you were in danger of getting injured because you needed so much time to get ready?
Well, perhaps, but I never really sustained a significant injury while squatting heavy, and I've handled like close to 1,300 pounds and like 1,276 pounds in like partial squat, and I never experienced an injury other than maybe some little tweak here or there. So I think the proof is in the pudding. Going into my powerlifting career already beat up and not ever sustaining an injury from squatting, I think is a pretty good testimony to what I did was somewhat on the right track.
Yeah, I mean, I think it kind of speaks to what you've been saying in the past that doing a lot of one repetition sets i- is a pretty good idea with squats because you have less time on attention to have technique breakdown. You know.
Right. Absolutely. Now,
Yeah.
keep in mind, I'd already had a one patellar tendon reattached, and I had plenty of injuries I had to manage. So, I mean, in the back of my mind, I think that probably was a good reminder to make sure I was thoroughly warmed up, just because, it sucks having to deal with an injury. So, at that stage of my life, I was pretty intelligent with how I handled my warm ups for my heavier lifting.
So how did you warm up? Like, was it a lot of like exercises, or was it also just walking on a treadmill or something like that?
Oh, let me think back. Give you a lot. I would do like any like your traditional kind of warm up movements, like maybe a lunge, some body weight squats, like light. When I say stretching, I'm talking like very light stretching, nothing that you would consider like a real like deep stretch, but just getting my joints and tendons and muscles primed to perform work. Probably would look like similar to what you would see like a sprinter do for a warm up, just not like not quite as thorough. Like if I might do a couple lunge holds, do like some squats and like work my hip mobility in and out. Just a lot of it would like really like honing in like your like deep breathing and the psychological building a psychological focus to clear out anything else that's going on in your life at the time and getting zeroed in on the task at hand. So as much of a physical effort as it was a psychological effort as well.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine that squatting like 1,000 pounds is not like you just walk in the door and your ego is left at the door and all your problems are left at the door and now you're ready to lift. I can imagine you need to kind of like, I don't know, just be around the weights, think about the weights, really focus, gather your focus in the right way, you know?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
But that kind of like gonna shoot off the subject a little bit, man. Like your training environment and training culture that you are immersed in is so important. Like at that time, I'd have to sit there and like really think how many like 1,000 pound plus squatters we had under the same roof, but it was a lot. And keep in mind, we had Eric Willybridge who ultimately squatted like I believe like 1,060 or something like that, like raw. Like the bar was set pretty high as to like performance expectations, and that's like so critical. And until you've experienced a training environment like that, it's hard to really express just how powerful and like potent that training environment is.
Yeah. I mean, I've certainly never experienced it, but I think what you said about getting ready mentally during your warm up, I mean, do you ever feel that because you know how hard it's going to be what you're about to do, how much you're going to go through, and how risky it is, and all that, that in a way your body just your muscles just kind of get a feel like they're not ready. Maybe they stiffen a little bit, or maybe they are not as fresh and strong off the bat. You kind of need to take some extra time to warm up, just so you can get that mind right in a way that now your muscles are also ready. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I can share a couple things with you. My good friend and training partner at the time, Barzine Vaziri. Not sure if you're familiar with him. World class bencher, just badass freaking guy, great coach. Brings a lot of insight to the strength world also. And I remember him mentioning, I'll kind of paraphrase what he said.
Did you fall out or?
It's going to feel heavy, and that's okay. Don't worry about how it feels. Focus on executing the methodology. Say it again, Matthias.
I asked you if you had fallen out because all sound disappeared. So I wasn't sure if you had stopped talking to think about what you were going to say, or if the connection was bad again.
No, probably bad connection.
Oh.
But long story short, one of my training partners at the time, Barzine Vaziri, kind of summed it up like this: heavy weights are pretty much going to feel heavy. It's just so critical that you treat your light weights as they are heavy weights as you're like climbing the rung, so you have the same methodology, same or similar intensity the same approach with every single set that you do.
Yeah.
Barzina was like, I think he's close to a 1,000 pound bench presser. He's like, oh my gosh, what does like 970 pounds feel like in your hands? He said, well, not much different than 700 pounds felt in my hands when 700 pounds was my max. So I don't know if that answers your question or not, but at the end of the day, that shit is heavy and it's gonna feel heavy. Even if it moves perfectly, 1,000 pounds is still 1,000 pounds, no matter like who you are. So the name of the game is moving heavy weights, and the old Ernie Franz principle: treat the light weights like they're heavy, so the heavyweights move like they're light, is like so important. It's a tip I try to give anybody that's like looking to build strength. Treat the light weights like they're heavy, so the heavyweights move like they're light.
Yeah,
now
definitely.
I remember, so at the time, the pattern I typically use like a wave of like heavy, PR style heavy, 100+% for one Saturday. This is talking squats, 100+% on Saturday number one. Saturday number two would just be completely recovery oriented. You would not like give a crap about how much weight you're using at all. Just have some fun and squat, practice your technique, etc. Then workout number three would be kind of a preliminary to your next PR day. So you might go to like 70 to 80%, keeping it very intense, looking like practicing a methodology that sets you up for success the following week. I think that's a very effective formula for geared lifters. We're all a little bit different scenario. So long story short, I remember I was at the time, I think my gym PR was like 1040 at the time, as I recall. And I was set to do my heavy day. As I'm going, I remember I got up to like, I think it was like around 400 kilos, and it felt like crap. It just did not, everything about it felt off. So rather than being super headstrong and just forcing the issue, I just pulled back. I knew I wasn't recovered. Things were not flowing at an optimal level. So I just pulled back and just like kind of scrapped that Saturday and looked at it like part two of a medium day and got ready for the following Saturday. Long story short, the following Saturday, I ended up hitting a 1060. So, I don't know if that exactly answers your question, but at times like dropping your ego and pulling back to allow for the right type of recovery, be it physically or psychologically, whatever the case is absolutely an important measure to take occasionally.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense. I mean, as someone here in Denmark who taught me how to train for powerlifting a while ago, I mean, he used to say that he likes to have a plan for what to do and how heavy to go and stuff like that. But the art is how to adjust the plan as the training goes on and stuff happens,
Right.
It doesn't matter how good you are at writing a plan and a cycle to go through and all these fancy waves, if you don't know how to adjust from week to week or even within the same day. And someone who actually was one of the guys who taught him to lift and who he later trained while that guy became the head coach of the Danish powerlifting team, he has been quoted many times to me for saying that everyone can train heavy, but it takes courage to train light. Because like everyone want to lift heavy weights, even though we just talked about how demanding it is psychologically, for a lot of people, they want to push themselves and lift as heavy as possible, get as strong as possible. And when it comes to lift lightweight to allow recovery and polish the technique, that's very hard to do. It's like embarrassing to do, it's not so fun. But if you actually can control yourself and hold back the weight, not go as heavy as you have to or would like to, then later on you're going to get a lot stronger or at least a lot safer off from it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that like kind of sums up the balancing act of like achieving extreme strength. You got to know when to really like push it just shy of that freaking breaking point. And then, like you said, it's almost like Andy Bolton. I hope you guys know who Andy Bolton is, because absolutely one of the best powerlifters of all time. In my opinion, the best true deadlifter of all time, done over 1,000 pounds in competition in actual powerlifting a couple occasions. And I think I remember reading that he's done like over 900 and a deadlift in competition, something ridiculous like 40 times outlandish stuff. But Andy Bolton sums it up is, a lot of it boils down to confidence, both on your heavy days and your light days, and as it comes to peaking for a meet. Let me talk about all three of those things. Confidence going into a big PR is everything. You've got to have your confidence freaking like at max level. Once you start getting into those like world class like numbers, confidence very important for attacking the big weights. Now, to your point about, I forget exactly how your friend summed it up, but having the discipline or the courage or something like that to go incredibly light. Andy, I'm going to kind of paraphrase what he told me, but oftentimes you'll see athletes go push a little heavier on days that should be light due to lack of confidence. They want to prove to themselves they can do a weight, whereas they should just have the confidence of knowing, yes, I can do that weight, but the assignment for today is to pull back, keep it light, and work on whatever the criteria is at the moment. So I do see this a lot of times, especially like newer powerlifters going into a meet. They want to test themselves at a higher level at a time way too close to competition day that would make sense. Why? Lack of confidence. They want to prove to themselves they can do it rather than just sitting back and having the confidence that on a meet day, that lift is going to be there. Does that make sense to you, Matthias?
Yeah, I mean, I would much rather go heavy every other week and know I can go heavy every time than I would try to go heavy every 2 or 3 days and suck a lot of times,
Right. Yeah. So anyway, that's a subject. So any other questions you have, like about my like personal like training or powerlifting or even like strength development as a football player that you think would be interesting?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to talk about like what did a week of training look like, or how often did you do each lift? Because we only really talked about the big three and Saturday training.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
So I mean, I think I already covered like the squat pattern that I used of the kind of like 100 plus % day followed by a recovery day followed by a day to kind of a preliminary, a very aggressive day, keeping the weight like 80% or less on a max. So we already covered that. So if we're going to talk about, again, this is like my powerlifting career, how I handle this. Bench pressing, I would, on paper, my bench press training looked like this. I would do my bench press training once every 5 days, meaning a heavy bench press once every 10 days. Now, keep in mind, with my personal quest, I had a lot of injuries I was dealing with. Keep in mind, I'm approximately 6'1", maybe a little taller, and my wingspan or arm span is like 6'7", which is not an ideal ratio for high level bench pressing. So with pec tears, shoulder problems, and a few other issues, my bench press methodology was like different than an ideal circumstance. Meaning, there was times where literally bench pressing 135 pounds full range felt dangerous. So oftentimes my light day would just be like very bizarre things, trying to like find a different groove. And I'll add this aspect to my bench press approach. Again, my friend Barzine and training partner at the time, he said, well, we just got to figure out how to get you to bench press without using your pecs, which sounds kind of strange, but being a shirted bencher, there was ways to like accommodate that. Ultimately, my best bench press in competition with a single ply shirt was 600 pounds, which I don't think that sounds all that impressive. However, Barzine said, that's okay. It's a world record for someone with half a pec. So point being, on paper, the bench press program I wanted to follow was heavy every 10 days, light speed work, etc. every on a 5-day, 10-day interval. So with that said, if my 10th day fell somewhat close to a Saturday, whether it be the 9th or 11th or even 12th sometimes, I would make sure I did that bench press on the Saturday following the squat, so I could get used to bench pressing heavy after squatting as it's required in a meet. That makes sense?
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So I did a lot, like with I did a lot of like direct triceps, rear delt, and upper back training just to give myself the biggest foundational advantage I could get out of my bench press, which I think is important for everybody. But in my case, I think it became even more important because the technique I ended up developing was like I would literally, once I got down to like the last 20 or 30% of the movement, I would try to like literally disengage my pecs completely, pull down a load the bench shirt, and like literally just use momentum to get up, off that first initial push. They kind of re-engage the movement. It was quite bizarre, but it worked for me. I don't really recommend that type of methodology unless it was like, delt work, grip work, triceps work, like things to practice that strange groove that I developed to allow myself to do competitive benching again. What led me to that condition where my like pecs and tendons and shoulders were so jacked up? A multitude of things. As a younger athlete, my bench press training was just wildly aggressive. Like I said, I was doing raw reps with 500 pounds. I remember days I would do raw 500-pound bench presses back-to-back days. I played Division I football. Was involved in like some snowmobile accidents. I've been hit by a car. Lost track of how many like crazy upper body injuries I've had, be it from an actual athletic event or some other type of accident. So my upper body was incredibly beat up when I launched back into my powerlifting career at age 40. So it's kind of a unique scenario in how I developed a decent bench press after all that. You're dealing with all that trauma. Does that make sense?
Yeah, of course it does.
So, I did learn in that I'm positive that I learned a lot of like real valuable lessons that could help, a traditionally healthy person develop a monstrous bench press also. There'd just be like, maybe a slightly different approach into like how they would handle the details. So deadlift, let's get onto that, because that was ultimately ended up being my strongest lift, comparatively speaking. I believe I'm still ranked number 3 in the world all time in the 308 weight class. I was just inches away from the all-time world record back at the 2017 Arnold Classic. So let's talk about that. As a college athlete, I think I tried a sumo deadlift a time or two, and I really sucked at it. So, again, like there's a whole group of college football players and NFL players and whatnot that went down to Ernie Franz's gym on Saturdays. And when I would ride deadlift, Ernie Franz would just kind of chuckle and cringe and say, "My God, Corey, if you ever learn some technique, I really think you could be a world-class deadlifter, but you're just using brute strength. But I guess that's fine. You're a football player. It doesn't really matter." So I remember that thought kind of stuck in my head, that when Ernie said you could be a world-class deadlifter if you ever learned technique, I always kind of had that in the back of my mind. So fast forward a few years, I would still go down to the France Sports Center, even though I wasn't like training to be a high-level football player, or at the time like training to compete in powerlifting. I would go down there occasionally, just mess around. So I'd say, I might as well try this more deadlift thing. And I sucked at it. I mean, I really sucked. I believe I was like deadlifting in the mid-7s conventional at the time. I forget the exact number. And literally a 315-pound sumo deadlift felt like hell. And it looked like hell too. So just kind of played around with it a couple times and decided while I was running my D1 performance, sports performance business, I said, I got to figure the sumo deadlift technique out. It was just kind of driving me nuts that I couldn't figure it out. So I spent some time just like playing with the mechanics and, picked my good friend Rudy Rosales' brain. He owns Overkill strength equipment. In case you guys don't, shout out to Rudy Rosales and Overkill strength equipment. They do make the best supportive gear in all of powerlifting, no doubt, separate subject. So anyway, I figured out at least I figured out the individual mechanics more or less to successfully sumo deadlift. So I think I hit, maybe around like a 700 or 725 pound sumo deadlift without really like going at the heavy aspect of that hard, just finally learning the mechanics and how to do it properly. which is a whole nother episode because I'm quite fascinated with how to dial sumo deadlift mechanics in for the individual. It requires a lot more athletic ability than people think. And I think it's a phenomenal exercise for anyone to really develop, like, hip, glute, and lat strength. We'll get back to that. So fast forward, when I turned 40, jump back into the whole powerlifting game, and I've got that thought planted in my head that I could be one of the best deadlifters of all time. I certainly wasn't at the time, but remember, Ernie planted that thought in my head at a very young age. So I remember like scanning through the top 20 list and seeing what numbers were out there. And I'm from the Chicago area. Well, anyone in powerlifting knows Ed Cohn. And, Ed Cohn at the time had one of the top sumo deadlifts. When he did it, I think when he actually did his 901, it happened like around 1990. It could have been 92, could have been 88. Like that was like unheard of. Someone deadlifting 900 pounds in a sumo deadlift method when Ed Cohn did it was just ungodly. It was just like, didn't even make sense. So I knew the 900-pound deadlift, someone I actually flesh and blood that I knew that was a lot lighter than me did a 900-pound deadlift. That gave me the confidence it could be done. And just looking at the records, there was a Russian gentleman that had done a 909-pound sumo deadlift with a hook grip. So at the time, a 909-pound sumo deadlift was the number one sumo deadlift of all time and the number one double overhand grip deadlift of all time. And I just said to myself, you're going to beat that number. You're going to pull 910. So that was like the psychological like background in my head every time I went into my deadlift training. So I really broke down the mechanics of how to successfully, how to dial in the most efficient deadlift mechanics for me. And I noticed that there's not just for me, but for most people, there seemed to be a stall point on a sumo, either immediately like breaking the bar off the floor, and then B, right at or around the knees. So I spent a lot of time training, like building just the most efficient, explosive energy I could generate in like breaking the bar off the floor. And I really think to this day, I'm one of the most explosive sumo deadlifters to ever like compete. And then I did a lot of block training with either 2 inches below the kneecap or 4 inches below the kneecap. And at times I'd catch some flack for that. We're like, well, yeah, you can deadlift 1,100 off blocks. What good is that? A lot of people are like not really believers in block training, transferring over to a higher deadlift off the floor. I completely disagree. Even if it's a diminishing return, if let's say you have to block pull 1,400 pounds to deadlift 1,000 pounds off the floor, who cares? You're still going to deadlift 1,000 pounds off the floor. So in retrospect, I wish I'd have spent even more time developing strength from that block pull position, excuse me, either 2 inches below the kneecap or 4 inches below the kneecap, because I remember my biggest, well, anyway, let's just pause on that. Am I making sense to you so far, Matthias?
Yeah, I mean, even if you're not weaker off the block, you might as well do the exercise to toughen up your body for heavier lifts off the floor.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I look, so this in my from 2013 to 2018, I only missed one deadlift in training off the floor, and it was in preparation for the 2017 Arnold, and this is where the ego got the best of me. And it's the one aspect of my actual in the gym training in that time era that I really know I messed up. I was training with Eric Lillibridge, and I happened to have a heavy deadlift day scheduled on the same day. Fucking cool, man. Eric said he was also a 900 plus pound deadlifter. Side note, I think we were the only gym in the world that had 2 900 pound plus deadlifters and a whole host of 800 pound plus deadlifters. But anyway, the number I wanted to hit that night was somewhere between like 890 and maybe like 915 if I was feeling like super juiced up and ready to go. So we get going. It's like, with one of our like we didn't even start the workout, I think, till around midnight or something. It was a kind of a late start. You know, we were both tuned up. The intensity was freaking high. It was an awesome night. So we're just going like, you know, similar. Eric actually would take more sets than me at the time. I'd try to conserve my energy. It's not important. We had like a similar progression up to our top end. So I think we both hit like around, I don't know, 820 or 840 or something like that. And we both smoked the shit out of it. It was a freaking good lift. So Eric's up next. He calls 920 and just freaking slaughters it. Hits that 920-pound deadlift. So that triggered something in me. You know, your stupid ego takes over. And instead of sticking to my game plan of doing somewhere between like 890 and maybe 915 at the highest possible threshold, I call for 940 because it's 1 pound over the world record at the time. I'm going to sit there and like smash a world record in training. Not my smartest move. So I remember looking back that night, you know, everything was tuned up, but you know, everything was prepped right for me to peak for that meet. And had I stuck to my game plan of keeping that deadlift within my threshold of something I know I could do without question, took a risk, hit a number that I just couldn't quite lock out. Stalled out right at the typical stall point in the sumo deadlift, and it was the only off the floor deadlift miss I can recall, like at least for like a few consistent years in a row in training. And I really think that cost me the world record that training cycle, to be honest. So anyway, there's a lot more to it than that, but hopefully that paints a decent picture.
So how often did you deadlift?
I would well, there's not an exact pattern I can tell you, but okay, there was times I would do heavy off blocks. There's times I would do use the word heavy off the floor, but keep in mind that it was always a number like below a true max effort to ensure the fact that I got it and was, had the motor skill patterning of successfully lifting off the floor. There was very light speed training off the floor. There was like kind of medium plus speed training off the floor. So off blocks, I was able to recover from a heavy off blocks session faster than I can recover from a heavy off floor session. So again, I'm answering the question this way because the heavy days were on deadlift specifically. The heavy days were spaced out based on my level of recovery. So let's take like November, December, January, February, like that 4-month training cycle leading up to that world record attempt day. I think I literally went off blocks heavy like 3 times and off the floor heavy really only 2 times. So, but how I would do it, at least once a week, something off the floor. It may only be 500 pounds, it may be up to like 700 pounds. I would just like keep the quality, the consistency, and the methodology is like tuned up to the highest level possible. So, but you got to remember that I would not suggest that exact pattern to somebody that doesn't have like decades of training under their belt. That was kind of like a specialized pattern based on the reality of what my levels were at the time.
Okay. So I think we only really need one thing, because now we've established you would squat heavy once a week, you would bench press every 5 days, and you would deadlift like once a week or so, like depending on how heavy you were going and how off blocks and off the floor. So, but
right. There might be, with that said, if I knew I was going to take a while before my next heavy day, I might do like 2 speed workouts within a week occasionally. If I was like based on how my hips felt, because I would just look at that as like batting practice. I would like, practice the technique, go for the speed, like really like, fine tune my technique. So at times I might deadlift more than once per week, but it would definitely not be anything, nothing heavy whatsoever.
So yeah, so like what about squats? Would that be like, would you have a very light day in between your main workout?
Nope, I would squat just once per week. The exception maybe just to like stretch out, I would just randomly do like maybe like a 135, just, but couldn't even really call it a workout. Literally, my squat pattern was one.
Yeah, you fell out again.
Copy. Oh yeah, my main squat pattern was literally just one time per week.
Okay, how did you like come to the conclusion that you should only
Matthias?
be?
What was the? How did I come to what conclusion?
That you should only squat once per week, because a lot of people are doing it like 2 or 3 times per week and then go to have lighter practice or speed work or something, you know?
Oh, well, I just figured if you weren't recovered, what's the point? I didn't want to beat myself up. Now, keep in mind, there were times in my life where I remember like squatting or doing some kind of heavy leg exertion like 5 times a week at certain to like powerlifting development. You look at a lot of great Olympic weightlifters, they're squat like shit. Some of those guys, I remember hearing like the Bulgarians, they're squatting like, I don't know, 8, 9, 12 times a week. So a great deal of strength can be accomplished with high frequency squatting. I just don't think you're going to get that upper echelon, like that extreme, like higher end strength by squatting that frequently. You can still build a heck of a base and still build a very strong squat. It's just not going to be a true peak squat when you're squatting like too frequently, in my opinion.
Okay, so you did it like 5 times per week sometimes. Was that because you wanted to like get in better shape or something like that for going heavier later?
Not really necessarily for going heavier later. There was a okay, specific. Now, keep in mind, this has nothing to do with powerlifting. This is just my own training quest, my own, like, I guess you could say experimentation, doing some different things. There was a period of time where I was like, just seeing how lean I could get in like a 3-month period. And I just noticed that the more often I did legs, like the faster my metabolism spun. So I got down to like, without doing any like traditional cardio, just all in the weight room, I would like start every single workout with a fairly intense leg workout. That's why I was doing 5 times a week. Really no other reason than that.
You know, I actually did something like that once, where I squatted like 5, 6 days a week. And I noticed that from one day to the next, I would lose like 3 pounds of body weight. And then I would not gain them back at all. And then a few days later, I might lose another kilo, something like that. And
Sure.
for some reason, I would just start to lose weight fast, and I would have to eat junk food and stuff like that, just because I squatted more often. And even though I didn't even train that much over a complete week schedule. And like, I don't know why that is. It was so special about it, but that's what happened.
Hold on, I got a special delivery here.
How are you doing down here?
Get the best phone service possible. The best phone service possible. Say hi to Denmark, Stroker.
Hola.
Yeah.
Hola.
Anyway, slight break in the action there.
Yeah.
Well, keep asking me questions, because hopefully whoever's listening to this can get, gain some type of knowledge from it. We can probably talk about some like training mistakes I've made too, man. Because
yeah, but
a very wise person will learn. A wise person can learn from other mistakes, and so maybe fire away at some of those.
Actually, I think we are starting to come up to 45 minutes. You didn't want it to be longer than that, right?
Oh, okay, sure. We can wrap this one up.
Yeah, but that leaves a topic for next time, or one of the future episodes. You know, training mistakes.
Oh yeah, most definitely. Well, I think something we should cover also is like nutrition, nutrition supplements, and this is the subject matter, PEDs also, because that played a role in my powerlifting career. And again, I've got some like what worked, what didn't work, things that I thought were pretty smart, things that I thought were clearly like not the best decisions also. So it would, nutrition, recovery, supplements, PEDs, all that stuff we can get into. And even like maybe the mental health aspect of performing at high level athletics is like worthy of its own episode. So anyway, hopefully this information helps someone in some capacity, or at minimum was entertaining. So Sexy Viking, I appreciate your input, brother. Thank you so much.
I'm glad to be here.
All righty. Well, we're going to sign off for now. Thanks for hanging in there with us. I know the technological superiority is lacking a little bit in this production so far, but that will change in time. Thank you, everybody. God bless, and we'll talk to you soon.